It was a cold, silent night, the kind where even the sound of the wind seems to whisper secrets. The house at the top of the hill, surrounded by ancient trees and its windows always closed, hid something no one could have imagined. Inside, the clock seemed to have stopped in time. Each minute felt like an eternity. Each footstep echoed like a cruel reminder that inside, freedom was but a distant memory. She was locked away, held captive for 53 days, and most disturbing of all was the knowledge that the one holding her captive was not some random stranger, but someone who had once sat before her on a classroom bench, looking at her with respect and admiration. That same gaze now held a sickening shadow, an obsession that had turned to torture. For the first few days she tried to believe it was a nightmare, that at any moment someone would knock on the door and it would all be over. But the hours dragged on, and reality became increasingly cruel. The musty smell, the biting, cold, and the heavy silence were her only companions. Sometimes he would appear, the former student, now unrecognizable, bringing cold food and words that mixed affection and threat. He told her he loved her, that no one would understand her like he did, and she, powerless, pretended to believe him, trying to decipher in each gesture a loophole, a chance, a weakness. Her mind, once lucid, began to oscillate between fear and hope, between the desire to survive and the dread of what would come when the sun set. Outside, the town went about its daily business, unaware of the horror unfolding behind the closed curtains. Friends were surprised by his disappearance, but no one suspected anything. After all, he was polite, helpful, an ordinary face among so many, and that's what made it all the more frightening. Evil sometimes doesn't have red eyes or sinister smiles. Sometimes it wears a calm expression and says, "Good morning" to the neighbor. Inside that house, the walls seemed to be watching. Her, complicit in what was happening, and every noise, the creaking of the floorboards, the distant sound of footsteps, made her heart race. But something inside her refused to give in completely. There was a spark, an instinct that whispered that this wasn't the end yet, that somehow someone would notice the signs. And as he slept upstairs, she mentally counted the hours, the noises, the patterns. Every detail could be the key. Time passed, the fear grew, but an idea began to form, timid, almost imperceptible, and one that would change everything. Stories like this move us in a unique way. Those who feel this kind of chill, this mix of fear, empathy, and curiosity, understand the weight of every minute inside that house, the desperation of those who just wanted to be found. This is the place for those who experience these intense emotions, for those who enjoy delving deep into real mysteries, into twists and turns no one expected, and into truths that, for too long, remained hidden. Each story told here is more than a case. It's a life, a scar, a piece of reality that deserves to be remembered. So come be part of this community that not only listens to, but feels each story until the end. Like now, and subscribe to the channel to continue discovering what happens when the impossible finally comes to light. Above all, she was an ordinary woman, a dedicated teacher, beloved by her students, known in the neighborhood for her calm smile and patience with everyone. Her name echoed through the school hallways with respect and affection, and no one imagined that behind that calm figure lay fears she herself dared not confess. She had a simple routine. She woke up early, made coffee, packed her books in her bag, and headed to school. She was the kind of person who believed in goodness, who saw potential even in the most rebellious students, and it was precisely this generosity that put her on the path of someone who would turn her life into a nightmare. He was just another student, shy, introspective, too quiet, the kind who almost went unnoticed. At first she felt sorry for him. The loneliness in his eyes drew attention, and she tried to include him, encourage him, talk to him, as she did with everyone else. She never imagined that that seemingly harmless gaze was recording every gesture, every word, every detail about her. As time passed, he graduated, and life went on as normal. She forgot about the reserved student, continued teaching, met new people, made new plans. But unbeknownst to her, someone was watching her from afar. He had developed a kind of fascination, a kind of silent obsession. It started with small things, following her social media, showing up at the same places she frequented, observing her house from afar. Small details that isolated seemed coincidental, and she, accustomed to seeing the best in people, failed to notice the danger growing around her. Neighbors sometimes commented on a car parked too long on the street, but she laughed, saying it must be someone waiting for someone. That was how fear began to creep in, slowly, quietly, taking shape behind the ordinary routine. The first time she saw him again was on an autumn afternoon. He showed up at school, saying he wanted to talk, that he missed classes, that he needed advice. She welcomed him kindly, never imagining that their reunion would be the beginning of a trap. During their conversation, she noticed something different. There was a strange glint in his eyes, an insistence that made her uncomfortable. He reminded her of things she barely remembered, the type of perfume he wore, the necklace she used to wear on Fridays, even the name of the cat she had back then. It bothered her, but again, she tried not to judge. After all, he was just a former student, and it was precisely that trust that he used against her. Over the next few days, small incidents began to occur. Doors unlocked that she swore she'd closed, noises from the backyard. In the wee hours of the morning, objects out of place. She tried to convince herself it was distraction, fatigue, maybe the wind, but deep down, something inside her knew something was wrong. Instinct kicked in, and she began checking the windows before bed, leaving the lights on in certain rooms, and changing her route from home to work. Even so, the unease grew. One night, coming home from school, she noticed something that made her freeze. On the door was a handwritten note. "I miss our talks." No signature, but she recognized the handwriting, the same rounded lines from the essays he'd graded years ago. Fear began to eat away at what little peace she had left. She went to the police, told them what was happening, but the response was the same as always. "Without proof, there's not much we can do." She left with the bitter feeling of being alone. Fear was now a constant companion. Every sound, every shadow felt like a warning. The nights grew long, and the silence in the house unbearable. She began sleeping with the phone by her side, ready to dial any number that would mean help, but the real terror was yet to come. One rainy afternoon, as she was returning from shopping, she noticed the back door was ajar. Her heart raced. She felt the heavy air, the scent of something different, and when she tried to take a step back, a soft, almost familiar voice echoed behind her. "I thought you'd never come home." It was him, her former student. His gaze fixed, his smile crooked, and in his hands, an object that reflected the little light that came through the window. She didn't have time to run or to scream. The world went dark. When she awoke, time had ceased to exist. The walls were grey, the window was barred, and the only door was locked. It was then that she realized she was inside her own house, but she no longer owned it. He had turned her home into a prison. The place where she felt safe was now a prison. The hours passed slowly, and his voice became a constant sound, a noise that mixed tenderness and madness. He told her he was protecting her, that the outside world was dangerous, that she would only be safe here, with him, and she listened, motionless, trying to understand when kindness became a sentence. The days blended together. She marked time with discrete lines on the wall, hidden behind a piece of furniture. She tried to remember people's faces, the students' laughter, the sound of the school gates, as if reliving memories could keep her alive. Sometimes he seemed calm. He asked questions about her life, talked about the past as if nothing had happened. At other times he became unpredictable, aggressive, with a look in his eye that suggested he was about to collapse, and it was in this chaos that she learned to survive, to pretend, to smile, to wait for the right moment. Every time he walked up the stairs, her heart raced. The sound of his footsteps was a harbinger of what was to come. She never knew what to expect. A plate of food, a conversation, or more pain. And it was there, between fear and desperation, that she began to plan. Small details, too simple to draw attention but carefully calculated. She knew that time was the only weapon she had, and as the days dragged on she began to notice patterns. The time he fell asleep, the sound of the gate, the slivers of light that crept in at dawn. Every little thing counted, and while he slept, she listened. The sound of the rain beating on the roof, the wind, rattling the windows, the cars passing in the distance. Everything seemed distant, unreachable, but inside her, something began to shift. The fear that had once paralyzed her now transformed into something different, a kind of quiet determination. She knew she couldn't stay there, and maybe tomorrow when he left for a few minutes. That morning, something was different. The air seemed thicker, the silence heavier, as if the house itself knew something was about to happen that would change everything. She woke before the sound of his footsteps, which was rare. Her heart was pounding, her body still aching from sleepless nights and constant tension, but her mind, for the first time in a long time, was awake, focused. Every corner of the place was familiar now. The creaking carpet, the sticking door, the sound of the pipe as he turned on the faucet. It was all part of an invisible map she was drawing in her mind, a desperate attempt to find a way out. For 53 days, she had been forced to learn the rhythm of her own prison, to memorize the sound of the key turning, the exact time it took him to climb the stairs, the interval between moments of lucidity and outbursts. And that morning, the sound of the key lingered. A small detail, but one that felt like a sign to her. He had left. She heard the gate slam shut outside and waited. She counted in her head, 1, 2, 3 minutes, until she was sure she was alone. Her heart was pounding so hard it seemed to betray her. Presence, as if the walls could hear her. She went to the door, pressed her ear against it, and felt the cold metal against her skin. The lock seemed to mock her, reminding her that any attempt could cost her dearly. Still, she couldn't stay still. He began to observe everything with new eyes, searching for what he had never noticed before. In the corner of the room, behind a box, he saw something metallic, a small, loose hinge, almost invisible. This was new. All along, fear had blinded her. But now she saw. The captivity, once a perfect prison, had flaws. Her breath became shallow. Her hands trembled, cold sweat trickling down her neck. She tried to move the hinge, but the sound echoed like thunder inside the house. She stopped, held her breath, and waited. No sound returned, no footsteps, only the wind pounding against the window. Her whole body wanted to run, scream, do anything to get her out of there, but she knew one wrong move, and it would all be over. Fear was her worst enemy, but also her compass. She returned to the corner, sat on the floor, and closed her eyes. She needed calm. She needed to think. He would return, and she needed to be in the same place as always, as if nothing had happened. When the key turned in the lock again, her stomach churned. He came in whistling, carrying a bag of food. The ease in his manner was almost unbearable. How could someone act like this after destroying so much? He spoke as if they were sharing a life, as if all of this were normal. And outwardly she kept her face still, her gaze lowered as if surrendering. But inside something had changed. From that moment on, she began to observe every detail of him with new eyes. The way he placed the key on the table, the way he locked the door, the exact moment he dozed off on the couch. Everything was information. Everything could be used. The following days were spent waiting. Each morning, she mentally repeated the plan. She knew she would have one chance, and if she failed, there would be no second attempt. He seemed more confident, calmer, and perhaps this had made him careless. It was then that she noticed a new pattern. On Thursdays, he would stay out longer, saying he had things to take care of. And on one of those Thursdays, as the gate closed, she decided she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the hinge again, this time with more force, and the surrounding wood began to give way. The sound was quiet, but enough to make her heart race. When she managed to release the first piece, cold air rushed in through a crack, a ray of hope. For the first time she smelled the street, but before she could do anything, a noise cut through the air, quick footsteps in the hallway. She froze, her body paralyzed, her heart pounding. The door burst open and he appeared, his gaze changed, dark, as if he'd heard everything. In the tense silence that followed, time seemed to stand still. He approached slowly, with that same smile that had once seemed gentle but was now pure menace. He looked at her and said calmly, "I thought we were over this." It was at that moment that she understood. He'd always known, always been one step ahead. Terror filled the air again. In the days that followed, the punishment was silent. He didn't hurt her physically, but he spoke, and every word was torture. He told her that no one was looking for her anymore, that no one missed her, that the world had moved on without even noticing her disappearance. And as Much as she tried not to believe it, there were moments when despair made her doubt her own existence. It was as if time was erasing her identity until only fear remained. But even amidst the madness, the flame within her still burned, however dim. One night, after hours of silence, she heard a cell phone vibrating upstairs. It was his. The short, repeated ring indicated an insistent call. He hurried upstairs, and for a moment, the door lock didn't make its usual sound. Tiny, almost imperceptible. And that's when she realized the lock hadn't locked properly. Her entire body reacted. Every muscle, every thought screamed the same thing. It was now. But how could she escape without making a sound? How could she cross the hallway without him noticing? She stood slowly, the floor icy beneath her feet, and took the first step. The sound was barely audible, but to her it sounded like thunder. The second step, the third, until she reached the door. Her hands trembled. Her breath was shallow, and when she turned the knob, she felt the most liberating and frightening click of her life. The door opened. A dark hallway separated her from the entrance. Outside, the moon illuminated part of the room, and the wind coming through the window carried the scent of night. And then the sound she feared most, his voice coming from upstairs, calling her name. Low, calm, but charged with something terrible. She froze, and in that instant, she understood that freedom had a price. A price that was about to be exacted. The sound of his voice coming down the stairs made her entire body freeze. It was a mixture of fear and adrenaline, an almost physical sensation that every second now could decide whether she lived or died. His steps were slow, calculated, and the creaking of the wood beneath his weight felt like a countdown. She huddled behind the door, trying to control her breathing as his shadow fell on the wall. "I know you're there," he said, his tone a mix of calm and madness. Each word echoed like a knife piercing the silence. Time seemed distorted. Her heart was beating so fast it was hard to distinguish his voice from the pounding of her footsteps. When he turned the corner, she moved. A pure, almost instinctive impulse. She ran toward the living room, her bare feet hitting the cold floor, and for a second she thought she could reach the door. But the metallic sound behind her betrayed her. He was coming. She pulled hard on the doorknob, but the lock stuck. A scream almost escaped her throat, and then the shock. A hand grabbed her arm. He was there, his gaze wild, his face inches from hers. "You don't understand. I saved you from the world," he said, squeezing tighter. Tears began to fall, but what came out of her mouth wasn't a cry for help. It was a simple, cold sentence. "You destroyed me." This unhinged him. For a moment, he stood still, his gaze lost, as if the words had penetrated the sickening armor he'd created in his own mind. And in that brief interval, she reacted. She grabbed the nearest object, a piece of iron from the loose railing, and hit him. He fell. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Her body trembled, her hands covered in blood, but there was no time to think. She had to get out of there. She ran to the door, turned the lock, and the sound of the wind rushing in was like her first breath after a long time underwater. The street felt like another world, alive, cold, real. She staggered out without looking back, her body weak, her mind trying to understand if this was really happening. At the first house she saw, she banged on the door with all her might, screaming for help. When the resident opened it, she was speechless. Her face was bruised, her eyes wide, fear etched in every feature. "Please, he's still there," was all she could say before collapsing. The sirens came minutes later. The sound piercing the dawn was confirmation that hell was finally ending. The police entered the house and found him unconscious, still with the same blank expression, as if he didn't understand what had happened. Inside the prison, they found notes, old photos, and her personal belongings carefully stored, as if he had tried to recreate the life he never had. What was most shocking was the coldness of the details, her every movement recorded, every habit documented. He had turned obsession into routine, and unhealthy love into prison. But even after she was freed, she didn't feel free. Her body was gone, but her mind was still trapped in that room. The nights grew long, and ordinary sounds seemed like echoes of that terror. The fear didn't disappear. It just changed form. She tried to get her life back on track, go to the grocery store, walk the streets, But every unfamiliar face made her look over her shoulder. People told her she was strong, that surviving was already a victory. But only those who have been through something like this understand that surviving isn't the same as living. The police began investigating the details and discovered that he had planned everything for months. He had installed street cameras, tracked schedules, and noted routes. Everything was meticulously organized, like a madman's plan. They also discovered that, before she disappeared, he had tried to approach other women but always gave up halfway, as if waiting for the perfect victim. This made the case even more prominent, not only because of its horror, but also because of its coldness. The story spread, made headlines, and became a topic of conversation and debate. Everyone wanted to understand how someone seemingly normal could hide such darkness. Meanwhile, she tried to rebuild what was left. She returned to her parents' house for a while, avoiding mirrors, avoiding talking about what she'd experienced. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night thinking she was still there, locked away, hearing footsteps in the hallway. The trauma became a shadow, and every attempt to forget it only seemed to make it more present. There were moments when she doubted herself, wondering if she had truly escaped or if it was all an illusion. Freedom, in a way, could also be captivity, a feat of memories that left no room for the present. Even so, something inside her didn't die. A small but real part insisted that surviving couldn't have been in vain, that she needed to transform that terror into a voice, into something that could warn others, prevent anyone else from going through the same thing. And that's why months later, as the trial approached, she decided to speak out, not as a victim, but as a living witness to a story many would rather forget. The fear was still there, but now mixed with something new, courage. And it's precisely at that moment, as she prepares to face the man who tried to erase her existence, that something unexpected happens. A forgotten detail, a name mentioned by a police officer during the investigation, a trace that didn't make sense at first, but now began to fit together in a disturbing way. Something that could completely change everything she believed about those 53 days of captivity. That morning, the sun seemed to mock her. It was the first day of the trial, and even with the heat touching her face, she still felt cold inside, the kind of cold that starts in the stomach and spreads throughout the body, like a memory of a terror that never quite goes away. Entering that courtroom was like walking down the same hallway where she once heard the sound of his footsteps approaching. Every flash of the cameras, every curious glance from the audience, everything seemed to tighten the air even more. And there he was, sitting on the other side, wearing a cheap suit, with the same calm, empty look as always. There was no regret, no hatred, just the same serene expression he wore when he told her he loved her. That was what made her uneasy, the fact that he still seemed human. The lawyers began to speak. The judge read the charges, and each word brought back memories she tried to erase. Captivity, torture, deprivation of liberty, cold, technical terms that sounded too small compared to what she'd experienced. As everyone spoke, she watched her former student trying to understand what was going through his mind. And then, for a brief moment, their eyes met. It was brief, but enough. He smiled. A discreet smile, almost imperceptible, but it made her heart race. It was the same smile he gave when he lied, when he feigned care. That simple gesture was enough for her to realize that the trial wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of another fight, to prove that he wasn't just an unbalanced man, but someone who planned every second of it. When it was her turn to speak, the room fell silent. She took a deep breath and stood. Her legs trembled, but her voice was firm. She told what she had experienced, not with rehearsed words, but with the raw truth of someone who still smells the moldy wall and the metallic taste of fear. She talked about the first note, about the doors that locked themselves, about the nights she thought she was going to die, and for the first time she didn't cry, because now, more than anything, she wanted to be heard, not as a helpless victim, but as someone who survived to ensure the story was told in its entirety, the way it really happened. As she spoke, she noticed something strange in his demeanor. With each detail she revealed, his gaze shifted. He didn't seem angry or remorseful, but uncomfortable, as if she were saying something he didn't want to come to light. And then, when she mentioned the notebooks the police had found, the ones where he recorded everything, he looked away. It was subtle, but she noticed, the same look he had when he lied. In that instant, a memory flashed through her mind. During her time in prison, she'd heard voices. She thought she imagined it, desperation mixed with fear. But what if she hadn't? After the testimony, she left the courtroom exhausted, but with something burning inside her, a doubt that kept growing. What if he hadn't acted alone? The police, of course, had assured her that no one else was involved, but she knew the kind of control he had. He planned everything. He left no loose ends. So why did some details simply not add up? Who called her house a week before she disappeared and hung up without saying anything? Who left the gate unlocked the day he took her? Small things which at the time seemed like coincidences, but now began to take on weight. In the following days the trial continued, but she couldn't sleep. She began rereading the reports, the articles, revisiting memories. And the more I looked, the more I noticed gaps. People who were never interviewed, locations that weren't verified, dates that didn't match. The case seemed solved for everyone except her, perhaps because her body had survived, but her mind was still in that room, searching for a way out. Until one rainy afternoon something happened. She received an anonymous phone call. A low, distorted male voice said simply, "You don't know everything," and the call dropped. The number was untraceable. The fear returned, but with it came a strange sense of certainty. She had always known there was something more, something hidden. Now she had confirmation. The problem was that from that moment on, the line between truth and delusion began to blur. In court he remained serene. The press said he was a cold psychopath, incapable of feeling, but she, watching from afar, sensed something different. That smile he'd given her on the first day, maybe it wasn't just a provocation. Maybe it was a warning, as if to say the game wasn't over yet. And deep down she knew what she'd experienced inside that house might be over, but the real mystery was just beginning. The days after the trial were strange, almost unreal. She would wake in the middle of the night feeling as if she were still trapped, hearing the sound of keys turning and the creak of footsteps on the floor, even though she knew he was behind bars. It was as if the captivity still existed, no longer in the walls, but inside her mind. Every shadow in the room seemed to hide something. Every noise in the hallway sounded like a warning. The freedom she'd dreamed of was now heavy. Life went on outside, but she felt out of place, like someone who'd returned from a place where time no longer worked the same way. The world seemed faster, people more distant, and the calm simply no longer existed. She tried to resume her routine, go to the grocery store, visit friends, take small steps back to normal, but any lingering glance, any unfamiliar face on the street was enough to make her heart race. The trauma had settled in an invisible place between her body and soul, and nothing could dispel it. Sometimes she found herself talking to herself, trying to convince herself it was all over. Other times she would stand still for long minutes, staring out the window, feeling as if she were being watched. The fear wasn't of him anymore. It was of the silence, of what he left inside her. Doctors called it post-traumatic stress disorder. Psychologists said it was normal, that it would take time. But time was what she feared most, because time was also what had condemned her before. 53 days in which each hour dragged on like an eternity, and now, even free. The clock seemed stuck in that slow, suffocating rhythm. The difference was that this time the enemy was invisible. He was inside her mind, repeating phrases, memories, sounds. The smell of the house, the cold touch of the walls, his voice whispering in her ear. None of it disappeared. But what really scared her wasn't the memory. It was what started happening afterward. Small things at first. The front door, which sometimes woke up unlocked, even when she remembered locking it. The phone, ringing in the middle of the night, and when she answered, only the sound of breathing on the other end. She thought it was coincidence, paranoia, until one night, when she got home, she saw a mark on the window, as if someone had placed a hand there. Panic overtook her completely. She called the police, and once again, she heard the same answer. No signs of a break-in. But she knew. Her body knew. This kind of fear wasn't new. It was the same fear that preceded the first note, the same that came before the kidnapping. In the following days, she began to avoid sleep. She sat on the couch with the lights on, her phone beside her, her gaze fixed on the door. She tried to convince herself it was all a product of her traumatized mind, but a part of her, the same part that had kept her alive in captivity, said otherwise. that someone was out there, that someone was watching her, and most disturbingly, amidst the tension, she began to notice strange details. The flowers in the garden, which she never watered, were alive and well tended. The trash, which she usually collected on Friday mornings, disappeared before she even took it outside. Someone was there, present but invisible. She decided to install cameras, not for security reasons, but out of a need to prove to herself that she wasn't going crazy. The first few nights were normal, no movement, no unusual sounds. But on the third morning, something appeared, a swift, ill-defined figure passing by the side of the house. The footage was short, just a few seconds, but enough to make her blood run cold. The shape of his body, the way he walked, it was all too familiar. She took the video to the police, but they said the footage was inconclusive. It could have been anyone, but she knew. That hesitant walk, the way he turned his face, it was his. The police assured her there was no way. He was still in jail, awaiting a final sentence. But she couldn't calm down. If he was in jail, who was outside? Doubt gnawed at her more than fear. She began investigating on her own, revisiting the court documents, the evidence, the photos. It was then that she found something that had gone unnoticed. In the forensic report, an item listed as unidentified, a set of partial fingerprints that belonged neither to her nor to the attacker. That triggered a warning bell inside her. A second person involved, an accomplice. Suddenly, everything the police had said made sense began to crumble. The following nights grew longer, and the paranoia more intense. In one of the camera videos, she noticed something new. The figure didn't seem to be trying to get in. It seemed to be watching, observing, as if it knew she was watching. And it was at that moment that she noticed something that chilled her blood. On the window pane, reflected in the light, a short message written with a finger. "You shouldn't have spoken." Her heart raced. Her breath became shallow, and she felt as if she were back in captivity. She rushed to erase the message, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the cloth. She cried, screamed, called the police again. They arrived, checked the window, but the message was already gone, erased by the heat of the house itself. No fingerprints, no trace. And then one of the officers, perhaps trying to calm her down, blurted out something without thinking. It could be someone trying to scare us. These cases gain notoriety. Sick people always turn up looking for attention. She wanted to believe it, but deep down she knew. This wasn't a prank. It was a warning. From that night on, she slept with the curtains closed and the lights off, as she had done before, during the darkest days of her captivity. Only now the fear was different, quieter, more subtle, more intelligent, and deep down, no matter how much I tried to deny it, there was a certainty impossible to ignore, that the story wasn't over yet. Something, or someone, was still out there, waiting for the right moment to start. All over again. The days dragged on again as if she were trapped in a never-ending cycle. It was like reliving the 53 days of captivity without the physical chains, but with invisible shackles that weighed more than iron. The cameras she had installed, once a tentative piece, became an obsession. She spent hours watching the recordings, rewinding each second, searching for any detail that would prove she wasn't going mad. And each time she saw that figure, her body reacted the same. Cold, trembling, shallow breathing. The face was always hidden, the movement always rapid, as if the presence were more a ghost than a real person. But there was one thing that never changed, the feeling that someone knew every corner of the house well. She began to notice patterns. The figure always appeared on the same days at the same times, as if performing a ritual. Sometimes the figure remained motionless, just staring, standing in the darkness of the garden a few feet from the window. And that was what destroyed her most, the silence. No attempt to break in, no attack, just that distant gaze that pierced the cameras and made her feel like there wasn't enough distance between them. One night, she decided she wasn't going to watch the recordings anymore. She turned everything off, dimmed the lights, and tried to force her mind to rest. But at 3 in the morning, a noise in the kitchen made her wake. Going downstairs, she found the back door open. No sign of a break-in. No sign of entry, just open. Fear now turned to paranoia. She began locking doors and windows 3-4 times, checking her phone every minute, and staying awake at night with a kitchen knife by her side. But the feeling of being watched didn't diminish. Increasingly, she had the impression the figure wasn't trying to break in, but rather reminding her of something, like a silent message. And that's when it hit her. The anonymous messages, the marked window, the fixed hours. Everything seemed calculated, just like her captivity had been. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a pattern. She decided to return to the courtroom. She needed to see him again. She needed to be sure he was still there. Upon arriving, she requested permission to attend the appeal hearing. Her heart raced when he entered, escorted by guards. He was thinner, his face haggard, but his eyes were the same. Fixed, cold, calculating. When he saw her in the audience, he showed no surprise. He simply lifted the corner of his lips in a short, discreet smile that only she could understand. It was like a silent code between them. The world might believe he was restrained, but she felt in her skin that this was not the end. That night, returning home, he felt a shiver when he saw something different in the garden. A small wooden box sat on the bench where he usually sat. Opening it, he found an old photo, her years ago, smiling at a school party. On the back, a single handwritten sentence, "I still know where you are." The handwriting was different from his. Firmer, faster. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a forgotten memory. It was a new message. The police were called again, but the same protocol repeated itself. No fingerprints, no evidence. But now she had physical proof, and that was enough to fuel the panic. Who was this new person? An accomplice? Someone influenced by the story? Or someone who had always been in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Each possibility was worse than the last. The box sat on the kitchen table as a silent reminder that the danger wasn't over. That night, as she tried to sleep, her phone vibrated. An anonymous message, short, with no sender. "Don't trust them." It said nothing else. There was no name, no traceable number, just that. And in that instant, she understood that she wasn't just dealing with trauma, but with something much bigger, something that had deep roots, that went beyond that imprisoned man and his obsession, something that perhaps had always been lurking. The following days became a routine of fear and vigilance. She began noticing different cars parked on the street, new faces in the neighborhood, and every detail felt like a loose piece of a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. The figure on the cameras disappeared for a few days, but instead of bringing relief, it made her more anxious, because I knew that silence, in the world she now lived in, was never a sign of peace. It was a harbinger that something was about to happen, and as she stared at the box on the table, her fingers trembling, she realized that perhaps the story everyone said was over still had entire hidden chapters. Chapters she never wanted to read, but now had no choice but to face. On that rainy morning, the sound of drops hitting the roof mingled with the distant echo of a siren. She sat motionless on the edge of her bed, staring at the closed window as if the glass were a portal to the past. The wooden box remained on the kitchen table, untouched, and since arriving she hadn't had the courage to touch it again. The phrase written on the back of the photo, "I still know where you are," seemed engraved in her mind, repeating itself like a constant whisper. Her body reacted as if still on alert, her muscles tense, her breath shallow, her heart beating in a flight rhythm. Living now was like walking on glass. With every step, something could shatter. Over the next few days, she began to notice someone manipulating the small details around her. A strange scent in the hallway, a freshly washed mug she swore she hadn't touched, the radio tuned to a station she never listened to. At first, she thought it was fatigue, the trauma playing tricks on her mind, but the coincidences began to repeat themselves. Then, one afternoon, when she went out to buy bread, she noticed a black car parked a few meters from her house. Inside, the reflection of a partially hidden face. The glance was fleeting, but she recognized the same unsettling glow she'd seen in her former student years before. Only it couldn't be him. He was trapped. At least that's what they said. She returned home without looking back, locked the doors, and cried as if fear were an old acquaintance coming back for her. That night, the sound of footsteps outside made her get out of bed. It wasn't wind, it wasn't an animal. It was someone walking slowly, shuffling their feet over the wet leaves. She took out her phone, opened the camera, and through the crack in the curtain filmed the garden. For a few seconds there was only darkness. until a shadow crossed the streetlight and stopped in front of the house. The figure looked directly at the window where she stood. Her heart raced. She wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. The next moment, the figure vanished. And when she finally found the courage to go downstairs, she found, stuck in the gate, a wet notebook page with a single word written in smudged ink. Sorry. That word destroyed her more than any threat, because somehow it sounded intimate. It sounded like him. But why would he apologize? And how, if he was in prison? She began to comb through everything she could find about the case. Old news reports, court records, police reports. It was then that she noticed something she'd never seen before. The name of a second suspect who had been questioned but released due to lack of evidence. A man who had briefly worked as a janitor there at the school where she taught, a name she recognized immediately. He was there in the hallways every day, cleaning, observing, always silent. Her stomach churned. The memory came like a blow. The day that janitor had appeared at the classroom door, asking if she needed help carrying books, and the former student had been there watching. At the time, she hadn't paid it any mind, but now the fit was perfect. He was the link. He'd helped. He knew. The figure appearing on the cameras, the different handwriting, the black car. Everything pointed to the same terrible conclusion. That man never acted alone. In the days that followed, she lived in a constant state of alert. She changed her number, avoided leaving the house, and installed new locks. But the fear was no longer the same as before. Now it was a deeper, more controlled fear, mixed with something she had never felt before, anger. The feeling of having been deceived, not just by him, but by everyone who said the case was closed. She decided to seek out a private investigator, someone who could investigate what the police ignored. And when the investigator returned days later with the first results, she knew the worst was yet to come. According to records, the janitor had disappeared months after the former student's arrest. No address, no relatives, no updated documents. It was as if he had vanished. But there was something else. The detective showed a security camera photograph of a deserted road, dated 3 days earlier. A man in a cap walking, carrying a box identical to the one she received in the garden. The ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. Her hands began to tremble, and for a moment, the air felt too heavy to breathe. The box. That box. It was his, or both of them. The memories came rushing back, the smell of captivity, the sound of his breathing as he stood in the dark, watching. And suddenly, an old, forgotten memory flashed through her mind. During her abduction, she had once heard voices. A second voice, hoarser, older. She thought it was a hallucination. Now she knew it wasn't. The truth, then, began to take shape in a frightening way. What she'd experienced wasn't an isolated act. It was a plan. And what tormented her most was the thought that while everyone believed the nightmare was over, someone was still out there, finishing what they'd started. And deep down, a question kept gnawing at her. Why her? Why did he choose her? Why them? The answer seemed close, but increasingly bleak. And perhaps when she finally found out, it would be too late. That night was different. The air felt heavier, the silence thicker, as if the city itself had stopped to listen to what was about to happen. She was on the couch, the lights off, her phone in her hand, the screen open to the detective's images. The man in the cap, the box, the caretaker's erased records. Everything now made disturbing sense, but it also opened an even bigger hole. If he never acted alone, then what was left for her to discover? With each breath she felt her heart race, a chill creeping up her spine. It was as if the 53 days of captivity had returned, but now outside the walls, on the street, in the dark, around the house. The doorbell rang, a sharp, short sound that made her entire body react. For a second, she froze. It wasn't visiting hours. No one knew where she was living now. The detective had promised the house was safe. The second ring was louder, longer. She got sharp, slowly, silently, trying to peek through the crack in the curtain. The street was empty, no cars, no movement. But something caught her attention. On the gate, a black briefcase, like those used by lawyers. No letter, no envelope, just the briefcase. Her heart raced. She waited. Minutes that felt like hours. Nothing, no noise, no figure. She picked up the folder with trembling hands and went back inside. The kitchen table now seemed like an altar of evidence. The box, the photo, the notebook, paper, and now the folder. She opened it slowly. Inside were only three things: a folded map, a small key, and a printed photo. The photo was of a place she knew well, an old abandoned building on the outskirts of the city that had once been used as a municipal warehouse. On the back was a short sentence written in black ink. It all began here. The ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. The building. It was where the janitor had worked before he showed up at the school. And the key? What? Did it open? Fear mixed with anger. It was as if someone were playing with her, leading her piece by piece in a game she hadn't asked to play. But a part of her, the same one that had survived the captivity, that had waited, that had counted the seconds for each chance, said otherwise, that this was a calling, that perhaps in that building lay the answer no one had sought. The next morning, unable to sleep, she put the key on a keychain and pocketed it. She took out her cell phone, photographed the map, and left a quick note for the detective. She couldn't explain exactly what she was doing. She only knew she couldn't wait any longer. If there was a hidden truth, she needed to find it with her own hands. The fear was almost physical, but there was also a quiet determination that hadn't existed before, a sense that this wasn't just about her. When he arrived at the address, the building was even darker than he remembered. Rusted iron doors, broken windows, graffiti faded by time. The wind blew through the empty hallways, producing a low, almost whispering sound. He entered slowly, his footsteps echoing on the cement floor. The smell of mildew and rust was the same as he remembered from captivity, and every detail made his heart race. He continued down the hallway until he found a locked door. The key in his pocket seemed to be pulsing. She inserted it slowly. The click of metal was sharp and direct. The door opened, revealing a small, dark space, lit only by the dim light that filtered through a crack. Stacked were boxes, old and covered in dust, but among them something different, a notebook. The same kind of notebook he used to record everything. The cover was black, the pages yellowed. She approached, her fingers trembling, and opened it to the first page. What was written wasn't just a record, it was lists, names, addresses, dates, victims, targets. With each page, my heart pounded. Among the names, hers appeared several times, but so did others. Many others. Some crossing out, some notes beside them like didn't work out, to change plans or wait. And on the last page, a sentence written in large letters, almost tearing the paper. She knows too much. Her body went cold. Who wrote this? Him? The janitor? Someone else? The silence of the building now felt alive, as if the walls were listening. He put the notebook in his pocket and began to walk slowly out. But before he reached the door, he heard a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, shuffling. They weren't echoes of the past. They were real. Someone was inside. Someone knew she was there. Her heart raced, her body paralyzed. The sound of footsteps grew closer, closer and closer, slower and slower. And as she looked down the dark hallway, a silhouette appeared. It wasn't tall, it wasn't fast, but it stood there, motionless, watching, its face hidden by shadows. And then, a low voice, almost a whisper, "You shouldn't have come back here." Time seemed to stand still. Everything she'd experienced, all the ignored signs, every detail of her captivity, came rushing back to her. She knew she was about to discover what no one wanted to see, but she also knew it came at a price that, perhaps, was about to be exacted right there in that forgotten room. The sound of that voice froze everything inside her. It was the same timbre she'd once heard in the shadows of captivity, hoarse, heavy, marked by the faint hiss of someone breathing too close. Her entire body reacted before her mind understood. Her heart raced, the air caught in her chest, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped her notebook. She tried to take a step back, but the floor creaked beneath her feet, and the echo of that noise seemed too loud in the hallway. The silhouette stepped forward, revealing a face she would never forget. It wasn't him, but it was someone she knew. The janitor, the same man who greeted teachers with a shy smile and swept the schoolyard at the end of class. The same man who had disappeared without a trace, and now he was there before her as if he'd never left. His eyes were empty, dull, and his smile, that same smile that seemed eager to please, was now a crooked slit, fraught with something dark. He held an old lantern which swayed gently, casting shadows that danced across the walls. "You shouldn't have touched that," he said, nodding toward the notebook she held. His voice was calm, but there was a veiled threat in every word. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Only a weak sound, a sigh that barely formed into a sentence. "Why?" she managed. "Why me?" He laughed, a short, dry, emotionless laugh. "Because you were perfect," he replied. "The favorite. The teacher who saw the best in everyone. You were the one who started it all." Those words hit her like a blow. Her stomach churned. Her mind tried to process what he meant, but fear clouded everything. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. He took another step, the flashlight beam illuminating half of his face, and it was enough for her to see the hatred hidden behind his serene expression. "Do you think he did it all alone? That he was the only one sick?" "No. He only did what I taught him." For a second the world seemed to spin. The captivity, the voices, the sound of two breathing. It all made sense. She had never been locked up with one person. It had always been two. Her hand gripped the notebook tightly. He noticed. "Leave this." "Here," she said, taking another step. "No one needs to know what really happened." With each movement she backed away, her body pressing against the cold wall, the sound of her heart drowning out everything. The hallway was narrow, the exit distant. He needed to think quickly, but fear overcame reason, so he stepped close enough for the smell of mildew and rust to mingle with the stale scent of cheap cigarettes. "You don't understand," he whispered. "There are people who don't want this to come out. People who turned a blind eye. You shouldn't have come back." She took a deep breath and, with an impulse she couldn't even fathom, threw the notebook at him. The sound of the impact echoed, and he instinctively put his hand to his face. It was the second she needed. She ran. His footsteps echoed through the building, the sound of his boots behind her getting closer. Doors opened and slammed as she tried to find a way out. The hallway seemed endless, the air heavy. The flashlight had fallen and rolled, scattering shaky beams of light across the walls. When she finally saw a broken window, she ran toward it and jumped. The glass tore into her arm, but she didn't feel the pain. She fell to the ground outside, breathing heavily, the cold rain beating on her face. She looked back, and for a moment she thought he would follow. But no, he was standing at the window, watching, his expression calm, his gaze fixed. And then he did something that chilled her blood. He raised his hand, as if in farewell, and pointed to her coat pocket. She reached in and felt the cold metal of the key, the same one she'd found in the briefcase. He smiled, the smile of someone who knows something the other doesn't yet understand. And he shouted, "It's not the only place." She ran. She ran without looking back, without knowing where to go. Her body ached, her clothes soaked, blood running down her arm. The map was in the car, the notebook lost inside the building, and his words echoed in her. Head hammering, repeating, "It's not the only place." If there was another location, another place of captivity, then perhaps there were other victims, people who were never found, people who, like her, were still waiting to be saved. When he reached the road, the car wouldn't start. The rain was falling heavily and the strong wind was shaking everything. He grabbed his cell phone and tried to call the detective, but the signal was weak. The screen flickered, and then a message appeared. An unknown number, just 3 words. He didn't lie. Her heart skipped a beat. Outside something moved. A distant headlight, the muffled sound of an engine. She no longer knew who she could trust, what was real and what was manipulation. But one thing was certain. The nightmare that began 53 days ago was not over. And now for the first time she understood that perhaps the worst was yet to come. The rain was relentless. Each drop hitting the windshield sounded like a clock ticking down to something she couldn't see but knew was coming. Her phone trembled in her hand, the wet screen still showing the message she'd just received. He didn't lie. Her heart was pounding so hard it throbbed in her ears. The car finally started, and she sped off, aimlessly just running away. The streets were empty, the streetlights flickered, and the world outside seemed blurred by rain. All that remained was the certainty that someone, or more than one, was playing her. And with every mile she drove, the feeling grew stronger. She was no longer a victim. She was part of something much bigger. She drove for almost an hour, until the map she'd taken from her briefcase fell from the passenger seat and lay open on the floor of the car. Her gaze locked on a detail she'd previously ignored, A red dot marked in a distant corner of the city. Another address. Her entire body froze. His words on the building, "It's not the only place," now made sense. There was another spot. Another location, perhaps. Another captivity. She pulled the car over to the shoulder, her breathing quickening, the sound of the rain drowning out her thoughts. The key was still in her pocket, the same key that had opened the previous door. What if she opened another one? For a moment, she considered calling the police, telling them everything, handing over the map. But something inside her knew that wouldn't work. They'd doubted her before, ignored her pleas for help, dismissed what was real terror as hysteria. And if there really were more people involved, who could guarantee the authorities weren't among them? Her survival instincts took over. She needed to see for herself. She needed confirmation, because if there were anyone else locked away somewhere, no one else would go, only her. The address led her to a secluded area full of abandoned factories. The buildings looked like skeletons amid the fog, covered in rust and silence. The ground was muddy, the smell of oil and rain mixed with decay. She got out. Of the car, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Each step made the hollow sound of her shoes hitting the wet concrete. The flashlight's light flickered, cutting through the darkness ahead, revealing only fragments. A cracked wall, an iron door, a fallen gate. Fear grew, but something inside her pushed her forward. She reached the warehouse marked on the map. The structure was old, but still standing. The door was locked with a rusty padlock. She pulled the key from her pocket, her hands shaking, and took a deep breath. The metallic click echoed loudly like thunder. The lock gave way. The darkness inside was almost solid. She entered slowly, the air heavy with the smell of rust and damp. When the flashlight beam illuminated the interior, her stomach churned. Broken tables, chains on the floor, scraps of clothing, and on the walls, hastily scratched symbols, disjointed words, dates, names. In the corner, something caught her eye. An old mattress covered with a dirty sheet, and, on top of it, a small metal box. She approached slowly, her heart pounding. The box was locked, but there was no lock, just a pressure latch. She opened it carefully. Inside, a stack of photographs. Different people. Women, men, some children. Frightened, tired faces, some in places that looked like basements or dark rooms. And then, amidst the photos, an image that made her body freeze. Herself. The photo was old, probably taken before the kidnapping. She was standing in front of the school, smiling, holding a stack of notebooks. On the back, handwritten, was a single sentence. The first mistake was letting you leave. Her hand began to shake so badly that the photos fell to the floor. The sound echoed through the empty warehouse, and it was then that she realized something. The wind had stopped. No sound outside, no rain, no noise. Total silence, and within that silence, a presence. She turned slowly. At the back of the shed, a shadow moved. The flashlight's flickering beam caught a high figure, a tall, still figure watching. For a moment she thought it was the caretaker again, but then, when the light finally reached his face, the shock was absolute. It wasn't him. It was another man. Someone she'd never seen before, but who seemed to know exactly who she was. He stepped forward, calm as if he'd been expecting her. "You took a while to get here," he said in a low, almost polite tone. "But I knew you would. You always come back." She backed away, her body trembling, trying to understand what he meant. "You?" she asked, her voice breaking. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The survivors. None of you except oblivion. You all come back eventually, and that's why this never ends." The sentence sounded like a sentence. Her stomach clenched, the flashlight falling to the floor, spinning, casting distorted light across the walls. She ran for the door, but the man didn't try to stop her. He just stood there, watching, with the same calm smile. "You're going to tell what you saw," he said, "and that's what they want." She ran out, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps, the sound of her footsteps echoing on the metal. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the key. She got in, locked the doors, started the engine, and only then glanced in the rearview mirror. The warehouse was still, dark, but a figure was still there, standing in the entrance, watching. The rain started again, washing the glass, distorting the view, and for a moment she wondered if it was all real, or if the ancient terror had transformed into something no one could see anymore. As he sped back down the deserted road, his words echoed over and over in his mind. "You always come back." And she understood what that meant. The nightmare wasn't an isolated event. It was a cycle, a network, a repeating pattern, and perhaps most frightening of all, she realized that now she was no longer just a survivor. She was a living part of the story she'd sworn never to relive. She drove aimlessly, her hands steady on the steering wheel, but her mind completely consumed by chaos. The deserted road stretched ahead, shrouded in thick fog and the constant sound of rain. The windshield wipers matched her labored breathing, as if each movement were saying, "Keep going, keep going, keep going." His words, that cold, calm voice saying, "You always come back," hammered in her head like a curse. Images of the warehouse, the chains, the photos, the mattress, the man's serene gaze, came back in flashes that made her shiver. She had felt fear before, but this was different. It was the feeling of being trapped in a much larger game, where all the rules had already been written, and she was just another piece being moved by invisible hands. The lost notebook, the map, the folder, the box, the messages, they were all part of something planned. It was as if someone had drawn a perfect line from the day she met her former student to this moment, and she was simply following the path they wanted her to take. The thought made her sick. Every memory of the 53 days of captivity now seemed to carry new meanings. The voices, the absences, the noises behind the wall, and that moment when she thought there was someone else upstairs. It wasn't her imagination. It never was. As she drove, the lights of a car began to appear in her rearview mirror. They were approaching fast, their high beams blinding her. She accelerated, her fear reigniting, and the other car did the same. She tried to turn onto a side road, but the road was slippery. Her tire skidded, and she nearly ran off the road. The pursuing car kept its distance, without overtaking, without trying to cut her off. It simply followed as if to remind her she wasn't alone. For almost 15 minutes the game continued, a cat and mouse on the wet road, until suddenly the lights disappeared. No sound, no engine, nothing. She pulled over, breathing heavily, her heart pounding in her throat. She got out and looked around. The road was empty. Silence again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was a heavy, almost living silence, making the air seem too dense to breathe. And then the phone vibrated. A new message. No number, no identification, just a coordinate and a sentence. "It's all stored here." Her instinct screamed to run away, to throw away her phone, to forget everything. But there was something about her that she couldn't stop. She needed to understand. She needed to see it through to the end. The coordinates led to a secluded spot near a lake she used to visit as a child. That detail made her shiver. Someone knew too much about her. She arrived at the location hours later. The sun was no longer there, only the blue twilight of dawn. The lake was calm, the water reflecting the grey sky. Amid the mist, a small wooden building, almost hidden among the trees. She got out of the car and walked toward it, each step making the sodden ground sink beneath her feet. The cabin was locked, but the lock was broken. He pushed the door open slowly, the creak cutting through the silence. The air inside was cold, thick, smelling of old dust and rust. The flashlight illuminated the interior, a small space with a table scattered with papers, newspaper clippings and photographs, and in the center of the table, an old tape recorder with a note attached by a paper clip. "I will play." Her heart raced. Her hands trembled as she pressed the button. The sound of the tape hissing filled the air, followed by a voice that made her body freeze. It was the voice of her former student, the same voice that whispered words of love and threat in the darkness of captivity. "You shouldn't have come back, but I knew you would. They always do. You want to understand, don't you? You want to know why?" The sound of a short laugh. "It wasn't just you. It never was. They chose. I just did what they asked." Her blood ran. Cold. Her legs went weak. "They," she repeated softly, as if the tape could answer. The recording continued. "The school. The people you thought protected you. It all started there. You were just the first to be noticed." A metallic sound, like a key turning, then silence. She took a step back, the recorder still running, until the tape ended with a dry snap. Panic took over. She ran to her car, started the engine, and sped away. The sky was beginning to lighten, but her mind was plunged into darkness. If what she'd heard was true, then everything she believed, the kidnapping, the attacker, the arrest, the trial, was just the surface. There was a web, something hidden beneath the veneer of normalcy, something involving more people, more victims, perhaps even more teachers. And now she had proof. As the car sped along the wet road, a nagging thought lingered in her mind. What if the story had never been about her? What if she were just the first piece of something much bigger? The kind of thing that never makes the news, that disappears into the archives without conclusion and repeats itself over and over, silently. The wind swayed the trees, day was breaking, and she knew the end of that road wouldn't bring peace. It would bring answers, and perhaps the kind of truth no one wants to hear. Dawn arrived pale, as if the sun were afraid to rise that day. The road ahead disappeared into the mist and the orange reflection of the puddles. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her eyes fixed on the horizon, but her thoughts were elsewhere, caught in the words that still echoed from the tape. They chose, "You were just the first." It wouldn't leave his mind. It was as if his voice had merged with the sound of the engine, repeating the phrase in an endless loop. Every memory, every detail of the past now seemed to have a hidden meaning. The meetings at school, the looks from some classmates, the way everything seemed to have been forgotten too quickly after the kidnapping. Nothing was a coincidence, never was. Fear now had a different face. It was no longer the dread of being locked up, watched, threatened. It was the fear of the invisible, of what lurks beneath the surface, of people who smile and feign normalcy while planning something terrible. She realized that the captivity didn't end when the chains were broken. It simply changed form. Now it was psychological, social, almost institutional, and the more she remembered the details, the more everything made sense. The disappearance of other students that no one reported, the hushed-up complaints, the halted investigations. It was as if the entire world were complicit in something so vast that no one dared name it. He stopped the car at an abandoned gas station. He needed to breathe. The cold morning air bit his face, but it brought a kind of clarity that fear couldn't erase. He grabbed his cell phone and tried to call the detective, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. He searched through his things for the tape, the note, the clippings from the cabin. Everything was still there, piled on the passenger seat. He picked up one of the clippings and read the title for the 10th time. "Teacher missing for 12 years, still hasn't been found." The photo was of another woman, smiling. Same age, same profession, same city. On the back, a note in pen, "Case closed." Same origin. Her stomach churned. Same origin. 2 words that sounded like a confession. Suddenly, a noise shattered the silence. A cracking sound from the back seat. She turned slowly, her heart racing. For a second she saw nothing, just the crumpled blanket and scattered files. But then something moved. A cassette tape identical to the previous one fell from the seat and rolled to the floor. She picked it up with trembling hands. She didn't remember putting it there. On the label, written in the same handwriting as the other, Part 2. They knew. Her mind split. Part of her wanted to throw it away, forget it, disappear. Another part knew there was no going back. She turned on the recorder. The familiar hiss filled the car. Then a different voice. Older, masculine, firm. "If you're hearing this, you survived. And if you survived, you'll understand what I'm about to say." She recognized the voice. It was the caretaker, the same man who had chased her into the warehouse. "This didn't start with us. We were chosen, trained to continue the work. They've been watching us since the beginning. They choose their victims. They choose their locations, and when it's all over, they choose someone else." A long pause followed by heavy breathing. "You shouldn't have messed with the map. Now they know you know." She immediately turned off the recorder, her heart racing so fast it felt like her chest would explode. She stood there, staring into space, trying to comprehend what she had just heard. Her blood ran cold at the thought that it could all be happening again, to someone else, somewhere. Else, that perhaps there were more people missing at that very moment, trapped, being watched while the world continued to spin. With every passing minute, the line between past and present grew more blurred. The sound of rain, the distant rumble of a car, the smell of the vehicle's interior, everything brought back mixed memories. She felt as if she were back in that house, counting the seconds, waiting for a rescue that might never come. She grabbed her phone and started recording. Her voice was shaky but resolute. "If anyone hears this, his name is—" Her sentence was interrupted by a noise outside. A headlight illuminated the interior of the car. Another vehicle had stopped behind her. Her instinct screamed to flee, but her body froze. The doors were locked, the engine was off, and the sound of footsteps approached. The headlights were now blinding her, and she could barely make out the silhouette walking toward the window, a light tapping on the glass. A calm, almost friendly, male voice. "It's okay, Professor. We just want to talk." Terror rose in her throat like fire. She knew that tone. It was the same kind of voice the other had used before he'd hurt her, the same tone followed by empty promises. Her hands shook as she tried to start the car, but the engine failed. She knocked again. "Open the door. We don't want to hurt you." The rain intensified, the sound drowning out her senses, panic taking over. Her mind raced too fast, trying to find a way out, but her body wouldn't obey. Then, in a desperate gesture, she grabbed her phone, opened the camera, and pointed it at the rearview mirror. The shaky image showed only the beam of headlights, but for a brief second, between the glare and the shadows, she saw something that made her heart stop. More than one person. 3 silhouettes still, motionless, watching, and one of them, even from a distance, made her blood run cold. The same haircut, the same way of tilting his head, the former student. The scream, stuck in her throat, wouldn't come out. The pounding on the window grew louder, the metallic sound mixing with the rain. Her hand reached for the ignition key again, while outside, one of the voices said, in a low, eerily calm tone, "You already know too much, Professor, and now it's too late." The car sputtered, the engine finally catching. She accelerated, skidding on the wet road, fleeing without looking back, the sound of her heavy breathing mixing with the roar of the storm. But deep down, as the rearview mirror reflected emptiness, she knew this story would never end there, because the kind of evil that found her doesn't live in a face, nor die with a prison. It multiplies, hides in every shadow, and waits patiently until someone else, somewhere, asks again, "Why me?" The rain stopped hours later, but the road was still soaked, reflecting the orange light of dawn like a warped mirror. She drove in silence, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if she had nowhere else to go, or perhaps she already knew exactly where. The wind blew through the cracks in the broken window, cold and sharp, but it was the only sound keeping her conscious. Her heart no longer beat as before. Now it was a constant drumbeat, marked by fear and anger, by the echoes of everything she had heard, seen, and discovered. The car smelled of gasoline and panic. With every kilometer traveled, the memory of the tape, the voices, the silhouettes in the rain, came back more clearly, as if the road were taking her back to where it all began. She stopped the car in an open space, surrounded by tall, dense trees, the same spot where the police had found her months earlier, when she escaped captivity. It was symbolic, almost as if the circle had closed. Only now she was no longer the same woman. The kind, patient teacher had died inside that house. What remained was someone driven by a mixture of a thirst for truth and a silent need for revenge. She got out of the car slowly, her steps sinking into the mud, the cold air burning her face. The forest was too silent, no birds, no sound of wind, just the kind of silence that precedes something inevitable. He picked up his phone and recorded one last voice message. His voice was firm, distinct, almost cold. "If anyone finds this, there are names, there are places, there is evidence. They aren't one, they are many, and they're everywhere. Schools, police stations, courthouses. I have the tapes. I have everything. But if they don't get to me in time, someone has to keep going." He paused, took a deep breath, and added, "They won't stop until no one asks what happened to me anymore." He sent the audio to the detective and hung up his phone. The noise came from behind. Footsteps light, slow but sure. She didn't need to turn around to hear it. The voice came right after. Soft, almost sweet. "You shouldn't have come back here." It was him, the former student. The same calm gaze, the same disturbing calm. But now, there was something different. He no longer seemed the obsessed young man who had imprisoned her. He seemed like a messenger, someone speaking on behalf of something greater. "They knew you would come," he said. "You always wanted to understand. And that's what brought you back." She turned, her body tense, her eyes fixed on him. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. "Why me?" He gave a half smile, the same as before, and replied, "Because you believed in people too much. And that's what they need. People who trust. People who believe that evil always has a face. But evil has no face, Professor. It wears the face of the one you trust most." The sentence hit her like a blow. Suddenly, everything made sense. The halted investigations, the lost evidence, the familiar faces that were always nearby. It was an entire system, not an isolated obsession, and she, without knowing it, had become the center of a story that wasn't just hers. An example, a warning, perhaps even a distraction from something much larger happening in the shadows. The sound of another car approaching cut through the air. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating his face for a moment. The scar on his chin, his lifeless gaze. But when she blinked, he was gone. Only the sound of the wind and the headlights stopped a few feet away. The car door opened, and a man in a dark suit emerged, holding a briefcase. His voice was calm, professional. "Ma'am, are you okay? We've received your location." She remained silent, her body still, her eyes still fixed on the spot where her former student had been seconds ago. The man approached, but something in his gaze made her recoil. It was the same look, calm, calculated, the one she'd learned to fear. She took a step back, then another. The man frowned, held out his hand. "It's all over now." But she knew it wasn't. The evil wasn't over. It only changed voices, faces, uniforms, and in that instant, without thinking, she turned and ran. The forest swallowed her footsteps. The sound of wet leaves underfoot, branches scraping her skin, the cold air burning her lungs. Behind her, she heard screams, engines, the sound of people searching for her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. When morning finally broke, the forest was empty. No sign of her. Just the abandoned car, the cell phone turned off, and on the driver's seat, a cassette tape. On the label, in shaky letters, "Final." Months later, the tape ended up in the hands of a reporter. The content was brief but enough to reopen wounds. Her voice, calm, said, "If this recording reached you, then there is still time. They are still here, among us. And if one day someone else disappears, remember, it's no coincidence. It's the same cycle. It always has been." The recording ends with the distant sound of running water, perhaps the lake, perhaps rain, and then silence. No one ever saw her again, but some say that on certain nights, near the old school, the sound of a tape spinning by itself can be heard, and a soft voice repeating amidst the noise, "You're never as far away as you think." This story opened my eyes to something many people feel but can't explain, that silent fear that evil may be closer than it seems. And if you've made it this far, it's because you lived every second with me, feeling the tension, the chills, and the anguish of those who fight to survive and discover the truth. This video made you realize how every detail, every sound can change everything. And now you can make a difference. Just like and subscribe to the channel so more people can also hear real stories like this, told with the intensity they deserve. Write your words in the comments. True, because it's what keeps these stories alive, and it's because of it that we continue. And stay tuned, because the next video will take you even deeper, where the line between mystery and reality becomes so thin that you'll swear you're right there in the story.